Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric on our continuing series, First Person Funhouse, where we take a look at some of my favorite first-person shooting games of all time, and today we're taking a look at Heretic, Shadow of the Serpent Riders. Before we get too far involved, you can do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined, we got a Patreon link down there as well if you want to support the channel. Now you are going to see as we open up Heretic, this looks a lot different than you would have remembered it had you played it, and that is because I am playing it in 21:9 ultra widescreen, and with the modification that I am using to run this game, it is actually my preferred way to play it because it just has so much more of a cinematic feel, and it is a lot of fun that we're able to modify these older games to run in different ways. Now you can totally play this in 4:3 or 16:9 as well if you'd like to, but for me this was a really fun way to experience the game, so that's why you're seeing it so wide on your television. But Heretic is running on the same technology that ran Doom, and it's from Raven Software, and they were a huge collaborator with id back in the day. They basically took all the id technology that id had developed, and they made new games with them. And Heretic, and I know this is going to sound like heresy, pun very much intended, I actually prefer this game to Doom. I love Doom 2, I played them to death when I was a kid, I have revisited them, but I don't need to play them anymore, and that's actually why I'm not going to be featuring Doom on this playlist, because it's my favorite first-person shooter games from the 90s, not what I think are the best first-person shooter games of the 90s, and I just love that the environment that Heretic is involved in. You have this sword and sandal, almost Conan the Barbarian-esque fantasy world that it is inhabiting, and all your weapons are fantasy based, and I just enjoy that slightly more than I enjoy Space Marines and Demons, which is to say both are incredible games. Heretic is just more made for me, and it does have a sequel, Hexen, which is excellent in its own right, but that becomes more of an open world first person shooter game where you have a lot of different puzzle solving elements, where Heretic still adheres to the old school level, get to the end, find the keys, move on to the next level, and I prefer that ever so slightly because you can get lost a lot in Hexen, but I would say that this is the better of the two games. But everything about it is your classic 90s first-person shooter, and of course in this variation I am using mouse look, and that definitely helps modernize the game, and I recommend that if you do play this now that you use a modification to be able to improve the graphics resolution and to be able to have mouse look, because it makes it feel so much more modern than the original release. And that's what's great about all these first-person shooter games from the 90s. They were also amazing and they were also popular, that modders have basically made it so that we can play them like they are modern games. Because outside of this looking graphically older, it still plays incredibly well. And I forgot, I did remember when I was a kid, don't run underneath there without being faster or else you are going to get crushed by the level. But the weapons are really inventive. We have this fist gauntlet here that's going to shoot what I assume must be lasers or mana out of the claws at the end. You have these skeleton demon beasts that are wearing full armor and helmets. All the death animations are amazing, all the sound effects are great, all the visuals are spectacular. This, when I was a kid, I absolutely fell in love with it, and I still love it since, and I highly regret selling my big box physical PC copy to this game because it is worth a lot of money now, and it's gotten to the price point where I'm definitely not going to be replacing it in my collection, because I had shelf upon shelf upon shelf of these big box PC first-person shooter games, and I miss each and every one of them. It's something that I'll probably get back into collecting in the future when I kind of get around to it, but they definitely take a lot of space up, so I haven't started yet. But if you've never played Heretic, you're absolutely missing out. If you like Doom, if you like Blood, if you like Duke Nukem or Shadow Warrior, this game is as good as those, but it just gives us a lot more to do. We have different spells we can use, invisibility, things such as that. It just kind of elaborates on the first-person shooter formula and gives us these light fantasy feels to it. Now, it's not light role-playing, you're not leveling up or anything like that, but you do have different items that you can use outside of just your weapons, and that is a lot of fun to be able to check out. I love how open and big the environments are. You get into these giant courtyards and you're just inundated with enemies, but the minute you move back inside, everything gets really claustrophobic and you're kind of fighting tooth and nail against the demons that are in front of you. What I want to do now is just let you guys watch a little bit of the game because the soundtrack is so spectacular that you definitely want to hear it. It's got those great kind of MIDI fantasy vibes to it, but I will be back in about a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about Heretic, but enjoy. So now that you've had a chance to hear a little bit of the soundtrack, you will see how good it is in that kind of like medieval gothic setting. And that's just what's the great part about Heretic, is that everything is so much fun. The graphics are great, the enemy sprites are amazing, how they come apart and the gibs that you see are actually influenced depending on what type of weapon you're using. It's not just one animation, there's multiple gib animations depending on if you're using heat or force or other things. That was one of the first times that had been seen in a first-person shooter. And again, here we are flying. Definitely not an innovation, Rise of the Triad had at first, but I love how vertical a lot of these levels are. You're not just on the ground the entire time. Sometimes you do need to use those flying power-ups to be able to get through certain areas. Now, there are two sequels to the game. We mentioned Hexen earlier, but there is also Heretic 2 Beyond Hexen, and that game is not a first-person shooter, and it is not as good as I would like it to be. So I definitely suggest, if you're going to check these games out, you can play the third game if you want to understand the entire Serpent Riders trilogy, because there are 3 different main characters, main antagonists in the series that you want to follow along with, but it's definitely not like the first 2. Now, unfortunately, this game is in a little bit of a rights dispute, at least if you believe what the internet tells you, that apparently the parent company of Raven, Activision, owns the development rights to this franchise, where Bethesda, having purchased id Games, owns some of the intellectual property rights. So it doesn't look like we're ever going to see a sequel to the series unless those two companies can get together and kind of hash those issues out, which is really disappointing, because the same way that they've revamped Wolfenstein with Machine Games, in the same way that it is making amazing new Doom games, I feel like Heretic and Hexen are definitely as well deserving of a revamp as those franchises are. I think this would look amazing in, 4K with complete polygons using the same environments in the fantasy setting. It's not something we see a ton of, and I really enjoy it. And I love that horned enemy there. What happens is some bosses earlier in the game just become standard everyday enemies that you see in levels. So they kind of take what was difficult in the first place and then just start throwing it at you like it's any other enemy you're going to have to deal with. The game can be quite difficult, and it is punishing, but it always feels so in a fair way. But I love everything they do with the game. As you go further on, you get into different environments, and now we're in almost what seems like a sauna setting with all these waves on the wall. You get these really nice colors of blue, and you're seeing some of the characters turn into more aquatic, serpent-like enemies. The more you play this game, the more it changes, the more it innovates, the more the environments differ, so you really feel like from start to finish, you're playing something that's constantly evolving, and I do love that about Heretic. Now, like I said, there's plenty of different ways to play this game. I'm playing a source port of it, and that's why I'm playing in 21:9, and I think that looks best. You can still play this on DOSBox with an original installation. It's available on Steam. There's 100 different ways that you can play this game, and no matter how you decide to play it, I highly, highly recommend you do. If you haven't played it since it came out, definitely check it out again. It's as good, if not better, as you remember. But again, I understand not everybody's in their mid-30s like I am that watches these videos, so maybe you weren't playing games, or maybe you weren't alive when Heretic came out, and if that's the case, you definitely owe it to yourself to check it out, because it holds up incredibly well. Outside of it being visually looking like something from the 90s, with these modifications, with the free mouse look, it feels like a first-person shooter that they would come out with today. And that's the highest praise that I can give about all these old games when I talk about them, is that they might visually look older, but they play like something that is current. And that's why I've been talking about these games, because a lot of my channel is console gaming and retro gaming, but there was a big generation for me of PC gaming in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. PC was just giving us things we couldn't get on consoles. So like I said, if you've never played Heretic, 100% download it. I don't know if it's worth buying a physical copy of unless you're a hardcore collector, because it does go for a lot of money now. But if you have played the game, if you have any thoughts on it, leave me a question or comment down below. I love chatting with you guys, and we will be back next Tuesday with another entry in our first-person series of videos, and we'll have videos on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday as well. Just here, as we progress, we start getting these dark priests in these robes, and the game is just getting harder as we go. And I love it. It's challenging, it's fun, it's colorful, it's innovative. It's absolutely everything I want a first-person shooter game to be. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.